home together. And now, one of the things that I admire most about Stacy is how she looks for opportunities, and when she finds them, she jumps right in. And last year, she saw an opportunity to participate in the 10,000 Small Business Program for Goldman Sachs. And so she applied for it and had heard incredible things about it, how it gives a lot of information, basically condensing like an MBA into is it a 12-week program, 6-week program? 12-week program, Stacy?
Yeah, 12. It's a few months, but it's very.
It was a long time, but a short time for an MBA. All that information, and so she applied. She was accepted, and this year, at the beginning of the year, she completed that program. We came to call it boot camp because it was so intense. But it left us with such a wealth of knowledge and a network of people to connect with. And it's just really given us the tools to be stronger and to grow. And in the week of the module on negotiation, Stacy called me on the first day and was like, Rayetta, this is not at all what I expected. We're supposed to turn our phones off and be fully present in this and like not be doing anything while we're listening. And this book is amazing. You have to, read the book, and it's about connection and knowing your own value and bringing that into the negotiation process. So I read the book and fell in love with it, and we started talking to all of our staff about it. And Shannon suggested we reach out to Mori and see if she would come and have a conversation with us. So we're honored to have Mori here today, and I'll pass it on to Stacy so she can talk more about what it was like to learn from and get to know Mori.
Well, and really, that's it. We're just so excited to have you here, Mori. I had to mention that I met Mori when I was doing the 10,000 Small Business Program, and it really was. I remember the turning off the phone. That was probably the first time that I had turned off my phone during the business day in the entire time I've known Rayetta. That's why I had to specifically tell her, because it was the first time that I was not going to be reachable. I told her, I told my husband, because I really wanted to make sure that I could be there and be mindful and truly to connect with what we were doing. And that in itself was a huge shift for me. And just to have that piece of mindfulness. And I really do. I think that's one of the most amazing things about the way that Mori talks about negotiations, because I feel like there's a standard way that people talk about it. And that's not what Mori talks about. And if you've read her book at all, it's about self-reflection, and it really talks about human connections. I also remember in the class, one of the first things she said is, have you done any negotiations today? And my first thought was, well, my teenager is not awake yet. So no, I haven't. But I feel like it just brings to point that everything you're doing is a negotiation. And she goes over all of that in her book, which is just amazing. Her book is Bring Yourself: How to Harness the Power of Connection to Negotiate Fearlessly. And it's about being authentic and bringing that to every negotiation, really to honor our voices and understand what our counterparts are looking for, and really how to get everyone's needs, really taken care of, and to look beyond yes. And I was lucky enough, I think it was last week, to hear Mori gave another presentation for the 10,000 Small Business alum. And so I was part of that. And it was, again, just amazing. And Mori, you're such a powerhouse. I'm so appreciative that you're here, and I just can't wait to talk to you.
Thank you. So happy to be here. I was just checking to make sure I'm not on mute, because after hundreds of these things, we still start off the conversation speaking and you're on mute. So I'm not on mute. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here. Stacy was just so kind. Even during the time that I had her as a student, my parents are in California. They're both early stages of dementia. So I was just so grateful that as soon as Stacy knew that I was heading home and spending some time with them, she reached out and just said, good luck with this. So the empathy and the compassion that I got from you, Stacey. I'm forever grateful for that. So excited to be here, excited to have this conversation with you all.
Well, wonderful. I will get started. Really, the first question, sorry, why do you think bringing vulnerability into negotiation is so counterintuitive for most people?
I think because society, and really if you even think about sort of movies that we watch, TV shows, when there's sort of a negotiation scene, it's always contentious and aggressive, and people are on each other's faces, and it's sort of like a Game of Thrones kind of scenario, right? The most powerful person is going to win. It's all out war. And honestly, if actually everybody here thinks about it, I usually say, like, the last time I negotiated with somebody who was really aggressive and enjoyed it was never, right? So successful negotiations are not really sort of done that way, right? Really well-trained negotiators oftentimes seek sort of solutions, right? That's what you're really doing. They're looking for collaboration. They're looking for a conversation that looks about sort of symbiotic sort of interests and where they can find agreement, as opposed to the win-lose scenario, which is really oftentimes not thought of as being a very successful type of a negotiations, right? Because it's short-lived. It's not looking at things in long-term perpetuity, it's sort of giving back and benefiting from in the long run, right? So that short-term perspective, sure, it could be, I don't really care what happens to this person, but if you're really looking at long-term benefits and relationships, the negotiations take on a very different form, right? And those include things like, looking at a relationship, looking at maybe where you need help even, and how you want this person to assist you in that sort of endeavor. But it also requires that we really know ourselves well, right? And we're sort of true to our values, because ultimately that's how we find satisfaction in life, in relationships. And so if you think about negotiations as being an element of that, right? Those regular important conversations that we have, then how do we get to know ourselves? I taught a class yesterday actually for Goldman Sachs, and gentleman raised his hand and he said, how does one get to know oneself? And truly it's the amount of vulnerability that we have, not necessarily with the world, but at least with ourselves, right? It's that truth. It's living in your truth. It's to be so open to understanding yourself and the things that maybe are challenges or weaknesses that you want to overcome. And here's an opportunity for you to speak your voice, to speak your truth. You have to have some level of that vulnerability. So I think it's challenging for us to associate vulnerability with negotiations or successful negotiations, because again, it's the sort of the win-lose scenario that we're so often seen or so familiar with. But honestly, if you really think about it, if you think about this being an honest, open, not transactional, but really sort of relationship-based conversation, that level of openness and vulnerability is really what will feed the honesty and overall satisfaction ultimately with the negotiations.
When we were talking, Rand and Shannon and I were talking about, vulnerability and negotiation. And one of the things that actually came up in our dialogue was sort of, how does that fit in when you're looking at like a patriarchal society where, we are talking about vulnerability, and if vulnerability, we see it, I see it as, such as a really a huge strength, but how does that piece play in? Like, do you see any difference, with genders and just overall, because we're so patriarchal and looking at other societies that aren't?
It's really interesting because, my book was never meant to be just for women, right? My audiences are male, female, professionals, housewives. It doesn't matter. Anybody could read this book, and that's ultimately what I wanted. I was like every marketer's worst dream, because when they're like, who are you targeting? I'm like, everybody. They're like, you can't target everybody. I want to target everybody, because it's sort of, the negotiations is like the soundtrack of our lives, right? So, and I say that to say that a lot of the men that I come across, by the way, I work also in a very male-dominated industry, which is sports, but a lot of the men that I come across, and even in my classroom, we're I try to create a very safe space, non-judgmental. I don't record any of my classes. And we talk about things like imposter syndrome. And people are very open. One of the first people to raise their hands is often a man. And they talk about imposter syndrome. They talk about having in their lives have to be something that they don't necessarily feel like is their truth, right? And not having necessarily the courage to say, you know, I don't want to be that aggressive. Like that doesn't even fit my set of values. But I can't do that because we're not really allowed to as men, right? We saw that in even sports when Kobe Bryant had unfortunately passed away, and many of his friends and colleagues who were sad and shed tears were actually, you know, we saw in sports like, be a man, you know, step up, don't do this, we can't see you crying. And it was grief. Like we looked down upon somebody who was showing their grief. And so if you really think about it, I think it's the patriarchy is actually sort of a, I don't know if this makes any sense, but it's almost like the blanket that's thrown on the society, whereas the people under it don't necessarily fit that bill, and yet still operate under the same guise that like, and women feel this way, that we have to be something that we're not because that's what's expected of us, right? So for women, it's almost the opposite, right? If we want to come into a room and we smile too much during negotiations, we're afraid of that because I don't want to be perceived as being weak because I'm smiling. I don't want to be too likable because they'll think I'm weak. And the very opposite of that is sort of like if I'm too aggressive or focused on my goals, then, you know, I'm sort of that word that rhymes with a witch, right? So we're kind of either way, we're looked down upon or we're criticized, and that's the prejudice and that's the bias. So it's really interesting that I think that if that's why I wrote this book, quite honestly, is I wanted to tell people like, be yourself, be your authentic self. Forget what society really tells us, because that's not people's truth. That's not, everybody's sort of operating under these really unrealistic expectations. And yet if all of us sort of leaned heavily into exactly who we are, then that would allow us to see negotiations for what it really is, which is a learned skill, that anybody can be a great negotiator, that it's really very individual, that there's no one type of great negotiator, and that negotiations then would become less scary and less transactional, and it would just become an opportunity for self-expression. So we'll find that sort of feminine tendencies, if you will, and I'm not talking about feminine in male, female, but feminine in terms of what we look for in successful negotiations is typically those types of skills that are shown most in women. So we are relationship oriented. We like to see collaboration. We exercise emotional intelligence. Those types of things are actually the very things that make people really successful negotiators. So yes, patriarchy, that's sort of the male dominance in our leadership positions and all that, those show us, just like I talked about movies, the examples that I think are the false examples, that's not even the reality of it all. And yet we've all somehow bought into it.
Wow, so that's it. We just need to, right, be authentic, be ourselves, but really get people to understand that. That's so, wow.
One student at a time, one student at a time.
Absolutely, that's really it. So one of the things when I was reading your book that you had mentioned, and I know you'd mentioned this too, I think I'm pretty sure in the class you'd mentioned this, that you had been diagnosed with MS, and you said that was a huge blow until you found the right doctor. And that really sort of, I guess, brought it in about the negotiation is everything. You know, it's not just work, but it's life, and it's personal, and it's yourself. And it really is that you have to be the best negotiator for yourself for everything in life. And really that if you're not valuing yourself, no one else will. And I didn't know if you wanted to, to talk about that piece a little bit, because it was such a different thing for me, because it wasn't business. It was, and I know you talk about how negotiation is everything, but that was such a clear, you knew how important you were, and you had to find it was the right doctor.
Right.
That was really powerful.
Yeah. So I was diagnosed in 2010, and first of all, I had ignored all the signs because I was busy. I'm an entrepreneur, so it's like I made no time to go to the doctor, and had been having numbness in both my arms for a long time, and had a luncheon at a gala luncheon to go to, and came to pick up my silverware and couldn't pick up anything. So I was like, okay, well, it's time, right? It's time to go to the doctor. Went to urgent care. They had me do my MRIs, and the doctor who was supposed to see me literally walked in the room, and he's like, basically, hi, I'm Dr. So-and-so, and you have MS. Like that was, it's like, how's the weather today kind of thing. And it was so shocking that I didn't even really feel anything. Like at that moment, I didn't, because it was so like in your face that I was like, I don't even know if I heard it correctly, but it was just so matter of fact, right? No space for emotion, no space for reaction. And, obviously it hit me afterwards. And because of the way it was told, then it left me to have to find all the information that I could. And, then there's the scariness of Google, right? So, what happens when you're diagnosed with MS? Well, quickly I see images of people in wheelchairs and can't take care of themselves and yada, yada, yada. And who's going to take care of me? And now I lose my independence. So all these, horrible stories are going through my head. I finally said, you can't go back to this doctor. We have to find you somebody else. Found me this unbelievable neurologist at Georgetown, so a researcher, one of the best in his field. And so up until that point, I was a disaster, right? In my head, this is what I'm thinking. And I went to the very first visit with him, and he gave me a hug immediately, right? So like in the door, it was a different story. And, but the hug was sort of the end of it wasn't even like, I feel sorry for you. It was just sort of the warmth of it. But from there on in, the rest of the conversation was all about, he thought I actually should have been diagnosed 8 years earlier because I had this thing called optic neuritis, which is sort of one of the first signs of MS. And your optic nerve is hit by virus, and you lose sensitivity. And I went basically blind in my left eye for about 6 weeks. He thought I was diagnosed. I should have been diagnosed then. And so he quickly said, look, you've been basically living for 8 years, super healthy, in shape, strong for all this time, and you've not taken 1 ounce of medication. And so what that tells me is that you are just that strong and you are just that healthy. And so what I have in front of me is not somebody who you think feeds into all the things that you just asked me about and you told me about, right? I see somebody totally different. And so I kind of want to keep you there. Is that okay with you? Like, I want to be really aggressive, and I think we're going to keep you just as healthy as you've been before you even walked through this door. So we talked about the treatment. He sat me down in front of the computer, showed me all my MRIs, taught me everything I needed to know, spent a very long time with me. And I left feeling knowledgeable. I left feeling really strong. I left understanding that no, my story was not those scary, horrible things that I'd found on Google. I was a different person. My story was that of somebody who had taken care of her body, who was very self-conscious about not necessarily the way I looked, but the way I felt, because my job was so grueling, and that I needed to work out every day. And that's what I had put so much effort into before that moment that I spoke to this doctor. And I thought, wow, like I had all the makings of somebody who could beat this, right? And survive this and thrive even. The story changed. That's all that changed. It was really the same diagnosis. It was empowered, though, this time around. It was in control. It was a look at myself that wasn't from a place of feeling sorry for myself, because that's a feeling I'm not familiar with. But it really took me back to who I really am, which is I've taken care of myself all my life. Like, this is who you are. This is who you're going to be. This is not, you are resilient. And That's all it was. And I think that's really important for people to know. This happens to us in life. It happens to us in business. It happened during this pandemic, right? It's very easy to go a dark place. It's very easy to tell ourselves a story, a narrative of ourselves that depletes us, as opposed to feeding us and strengthening us. And I think we just have to be super conscious of that. And why that feeds into negotiations is that if you don't see your value, nobody else will. If you don't know what you're deserving of, nobody else will, right? Because negotiations is all about persuasion. So you have to first persuade yourself and tell yourself what you deserve, what you're made of, who you really are, and then be able to communicate that to other people. It's not the other way around.
Well, and that really almost, listening to you talk made me think of, really how, well, do you have suggestions? Like, how are people, assessing your value, knowing your value? But how do you do that? How do you know what we're worth? How do you know what you are bringing to the table in any negotiation?
So first and foremost, I think that it is that really hard look at yourself, right? And oftentimes, there's this whole saying that, if we talk to our friends the way we talk to ourselves, we wouldn't have any, right? So that self-talk has to improve. And a lot of times, simple things like sitting down and thinking about some of your accomplishments, right? Writing them down and considering them. And what we soon realize is that, those things did not happen by accident. Nobody else did it for us. Like oftentimes it's not we're served those things on a silver platter. It's that we worked hard for them. That it was our blood, our sweat, our tears, right? It was our risks. It was our intelligence. It was all of those things that we put into it that we rarely take any credit for, right? So if you go through this really simple exercise of doing that, then you start sort of validating yourself. We don't often do that, right? And a lot of times we certainly don't speak it because then we're accused of being braggarts or egotistical. And it's really not about that. It's just a self-celebration. It's self-love. It's what we deserve. So if you routinely go through those types of exercises and then think about how you felt in those moments, right? The satisfaction, the joy, the happiness, the pride, right? And you start then thinking about those feelings, those emotions, that accountability, then that's what you start allowing into your psyche, into your life, into the way that you speak to yourself, right? And you become deserving. You are deserving, but you start feeling like you are really at that point that you can take credit for these things. People who are looking for new jobs, people who are looking for raises, people who are trying to find their voice in a relationship. If we do those things and we start taking sort of credit for them, I think that really shifts the way we think about ourselves, right? And by the way, motherhood are things that we should take credit for, right? Being somebody, I mean, for God's sake, I'm talking to an audience that does so much for other people. Like that's like baked in your truth already. That should be an easy conversation, right? That level of compassion and just selflessness is something to have a great deal of pride in, right? So I just say like, take that as an exercise, maybe even a daily exercise, until it becomes like a routine sort of a practice of self-love, and do that for yourself. And you will soon realize why you're so worthy and why you deserve more, why you deserve to have aspirational goals, why you deserve to speak those goals and to achieve those goals, right? Not just to dream them. And I think it's honestly, Stacy, it seems like it's a complicated practice, but it isn't. It's sort of like a muscle that you have to exercise. And that becomes the sort of dominant voice, that becomes the dominant practice, that becomes the dominant truth.
Well, and it's so interesting. I actually, I do some of that myself anyway. And I was really nervous about this. I think I told you this, talking in front of people is not, it's not one of my favorite things. I get really nervous. And before that, that's actually the self-talk that I was having is, this is going to be great. Mori is amazing and kind. And, that I'm grateful to have this opportunity, but it is because of my experiences with you in the past that we can do this. And, I think that was part of how I came in, and I was still nervous, but I wasn't sort of having the panic that I was having this morning about doing it, because I realized, that we could come and have this good discussion. But it is hard. It's really hard to have those discussions with yourself.
It is. That's that vulnerability, though, Stacy, that we had talked about. That's why it's important, right? The famous sort of Brene Brown quote, which is, "You can't get to courage without walking through vulnerability," and that's what this really is having the courage to walk through it, and then that becomes your truth.
Absolutely. So we encouraged, at a minimum, all of our staff. I mean, I tell everyone I talk to read your book. I like text it to people as I'm meeting them. And one of our staff actually used the strategies from your book to negotiate a new position for themselves on our staff. And it was such a good example of, empowering the staff and how it really added value to our organization as a whole. Do you have any other, thoughts around that, or about teaching other people to negotiate effectively? And really, because he really did, he brought to the table how it was a benefit for everyone and really had looked at both pieces.
Yeah, this sort of gets to sort of work I do around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it really is about, why companies, I think, even benefit from this is that, it's not just even in the workplace, actually, even at home, thinking about, why having different opinions and different perspectives matters. And if you then teach people, right, that A, their voice matters. B, even if it creates some kind of discord or disagreement, that actually that's even better, because that's the diversity of thought, right? If we, unfortunately, in our society, the practice that now many people are trying to sort of fight is that we are inclined to hire people that think just like us, right? That level of sort of agreement works for us because it's not countering what we know to be our truth, right? So the more agreement, the better you feel about yourself. Whereas if you bring in people from different perspectives, with different experiences, then the conversations, the level of problem solving, the innovation, right? That's what is further amplified because of that diversity of thought. That's not always going to be agreement, but it's going to be problem solving that will oftentimes get you to a far better place. And so I think that's why it's so important. And I love the story about your staff member, because then they're also benefiting from it, right? Now they feel further engaged, right? Now they feel appreciated. Now you have less turnover, right? I get that a lot because, the workforce is, I think, going to very much change and in a lot of ways suffer should there be this heavy hand of everybody needs to come back to work and this is how everybody needs to work. That is not going to really work for a lot of people, right? There's a lot of challenges with that coming out of this pandemic. So there has to be the allowance of differing approaches to the workforce, how people show up. And the real rule should be show up as your best self and be engaged and be efficient and be effective. And that only happens when you actually allow for people to show up as themselves and be effective and be engaged, right? And so I think that I'm very optimistic in some ways, because I think that a lot of this is going to happen naturally, because I think the workforce is going to really be challenged by this. They're going to lose people. And that may be now the opportunity for companies to look at this from a very different perspective, how to truly value people. But, with every conversation around a raise, every conversation, it says compensation, but salaries and benefits packages and different titles, what is truly involved in those conversations isn't necessarily the need for more money. It's the need to be recognized. It's the need to be seen. And I think that hopefully this is that moment where companies are going to actually engage in that more. Relationships will benefit from that. We need to see one another. We need to engage one another in a way that's meaningful and advances our personal needs only so much as it actually is to the good of everyone. I don't think we've done a very good job of that before.
Well, I agree. And again, talking about this staff member, after, we had multiple discussions about what he was thinking, and it's so interesting because that was exactly what he brought back to us at the end was, wow, he said, I'm so humbled that you guys really listened to me. It was basically the bottom line. You listen to me and you're seeing this value in what I'm bringing. And I don't know that it's something that would have come out kind of without him really reading the book and really being so prepared. So yeah, again, amazing. Your book was released right as the pandemic started last year. How has COVID changed the way that people are negotiating? I feel like it's a different world.
Yeah, horrible timing. It was released, I would say like Amazon wasn't even delivering, which is, that's like the end of the world as we know it, right? So for me personally, it became a learning opportunity because, as you started the conversation today, you talked about me not letting people have phones in classrooms, right? So it was like I was anti-technology in the classroom, period. And then everything I did was using technology all of a sudden, right? So it changed the way I taught. I'm all about sort of energy when I walk in a room. I feel it, I sense it. I'm very aware of everything around me. And this pushed me to take that to a whole other level. So even though I was on Zoom, I had to make sure that there were zero distractions, right? There was nothing else was around me that could have taken my mind away from what I was doing. So it made me, because you're always fighting the distractibility that comes from even just sitting in front of something in the same place for that long, and it's you and just a screen. Easy to get distracted, right? Like 51% of our time of every minute is basically our minds are wandering. And so it's very easy to go elsewhere, right? So it forced me to become far more focused. But I also started, I'm using myself as an example because you all see what I mean, but I started to really appreciate what this opportunity created, which was we were all of a sudden in people's homes. We were in people's bedrooms or living rooms or offices. We saw pictures and paintings and cats. And, there was an element of connection that we didn't have before. And instead of being so bothered by the fact that I couldn't be in a classroom with people, I started saying, but I'm so grateful for the privilege really of being so personal, right? People are inviting us into spaces that are so personal. So I'm grateful for that. And that level of just the appreciation made me lean in even harder into it. And Stacy, my classes are really connected. They're emotional, and it's hard for people to believe. I mean, even the webinar I just did for Goldman Sachs, there's like 300 some odd people on there, and people cry and they're vulnerable and they're connected. And what that tells me is that humanity needs connection. It doesn't matter really if it's in person. If it's in person, great, because then you have other things too, right? There is that physical energy. I won't ever diminish that. But what you really need to do is messaging that says to your counterpart, you're the most important thing to me right now. This conversation is the most important thing to me right now. And whether it's done on Zoom or in person, you're fighting the same thing, which is distraction. And you're amplifying the same thing, which is connection. And I think that maybe, just maybe, this time has allowed us to be a little bit more focused on ourselves. And when we're focused on ourselves, we realize when we're distracted. When we're focused on ourselves, maybe there's a level of emotional intelligence or self-awareness that we can exercise that we weren't doing before because it is limited, right? And so there's a lot of benefits, I think, that we can get for negotiations purposes and communications purposes in this setting. And folks, by the way, we're going to be here for a while, right? So this is not, companies are going to realize that not everything needs to have to fly you in and spend $3,000 on a trip, that you can do it this way. So it's going to be a hybrid situation at the very least for a long time. Appreciate it, embrace it, seek connection, get rid of distractions, learn to be mindful, learn to do mindful listening. which is very different. This is regular listening. Mindful listening requires you to be incredibly attentive and to not just listen with your ears, but to listen with your heart and to listen with your eyes. And that is so rich that consider this practice that is just going to make you even better when you're actually in person, when you're negotiating or having meetings and conversations.
Well, and it's interesting, you know, you said the person you're talking to is the most important person. And that was really in the class that we did, that was really how I know that I felt. And I was in a class with, I think, 39 other people. And I do think a piece of it is, I mean, I just think that's the energy you bring, but also it was clear that you knew who we all were, even though we'd never met. You know, you had, you know, I don't know if you'd looked us up on LinkedIn or how you had seen us, but it was very clear that you had background information so that you were coming in connected to us already. You know, because whoever you talked to, you were able to pull more than just the little bit that we had talked about in there. And is that really is bringing negotiation, I feel like, the connection piece of it. But are you able to talk a little bit? Because that was one of the most amazing things to me. I actually called Rheta and I was like, Rheta, this is so exceptional. There was 40 of us and I promise you she's never met us and she knew exactly who each one of us was.
While scary for my students, I do make a practice of, there's not one class I'll ever walk into and I won't know exactly who's there and what their backgrounds are. And I'll use social media, I'll use the information in that case that I've got from Goldman Sachs, but at Wharton, same thing. I want to know who I'm talking to. I want to know my audience, but I also want to walk the walk. So in negotiations, I mean, the value of preparation, the importance of preparation, the absolute critical nature of preparation is such that with you are, hold on one second. Can you all hear me? I just got disconnected. Are you there? Okay, so it showed that I got disconnected. The value of preparation is such that with it, you are far more likely to be successful. Without it, you are likely to not do very well, if not fail. And so how am I going to explain to my students why that's so important and how somebody feels when you're that prepared and how important and seen people feel when you come into negotiations that prepared? So I just say, you know what, I'm going to show them. And that's why I do it, is because I feel like, you know, when you do that for somebody, it's like the utmost respect, first of all. And it's saying that, again, this conversation couldn't be more important to me, right? I took this time to know exactly who you are. And then what my students feel, what you felt, is really that sense of, wow, so I should do this, right? Like the next time I'm negotiating with somebody, if I can prepare that much, if I can know who's sitting across from me, then think about how respectful that feels to that person and how that sign of respect allows people to open. Feel respect means that you're connected. Feeling that level of respect means that I'm likely to be far more transparent with you because you took that time to get to know me. So part of it is just my own genuine sort of curiosity for people. I'm a lover of people. Like I want to know more about people. I want to see people. It's just kind of my thing. But the other part of it is also sort of teaching by practicing it, right? Through teaching through example. So if it works for you, then hopefully it's something that you will do always. And I think if it's something that we all did more of the time, the world would be a better place, right? Like if we saw people in that way and were genuinely interested in them and showed that level of empathy, then just think about how much better we'd be for it. So it's just kind of my thing. And by the way, another reason I do it is because I too am an introvert. Prior to teaching 17 years ago, 18 years ago, I never thought I would do this ever. I was scared to death to speak in public, right? It was like the craziest, scariest notion to me. When I was asked to teach at Wharton, I can't even tell you how crazy I thought this person was at that moment. I was like, are you nuts? Like, I can't even, if you gave me a book, I couldn't read it in front of a classroom, right? You want me to teach? And here I am, 18 years later or so. And the reason why I do that, where I learn who's sitting in front of me, I know my students, is because if any of you are introverts in this room, we enjoy that one-on-one, very connected conversation. Whereas I'm not a big fan of throwing me in a cocktail party and I'm supposed to talk to everybody. Like, I get no energy from that. But the connected one-on-one depth of conversation is sort of then what I'm seeking when I'm in classrooms. So I sort of think about my classrooms as being one person at a time, as opposed to a room of 40 people. And that really just helps me generally.
Wow, it's amazing. That's so interesting to hear. I think those were the majority of my pieces. Shannon, did you have any other questions or things we wanted to go over? I am just thinking about all the stuff you had said, Mori. It's amazing.
Thank you.
No, I think you covered everything wonderfully, Stacy. I think now would be a good time if anyone has any questions for Mori. You're welcome to write it in the chat if you'd like me to read it off to Mori, or you're welcome to at this time, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask a question. Please do realize, though, that we are recording this.
Hi, can I say something? I just wanted to personally thank Mori because I heard you speak at the LaGuardia Community College 20th graduation. You did a class after the graduation, and your advice helped us put together a deal that changed our life. And so I'm very grateful to you. So I just wanted to tell you that.
Thank you. That was such a great night. Appreciate that. I'd love to hear more about it. You should connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear more about the deal.
I sent you an email through
Yeah.
your website. I don't know if you got it or not. So anyway, yeah, I would love to tell you the story. So
Do it again. I've been a one-person shop for a long time. I now have help.
yeah, I hear you.
And so
I'll
very
track
good
you down.
help.
Or someone at Goldman or somebody knows you. I'll track you down.
Please
Okay.
do. And Stacy, obviously, Shannon, they all have my email. So please do.
All right. But thank you. I just wanted to tell you that.
You.
I gotta go. I have to run now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I had a question kind of about the risk of negotiation. So these are the reasons why I think you should give me more money, boss. But then I get so anxious about them saying no, and then what do I do? Or, oh, forget it, we don't even want you for the position anymore anyway, if they're going to ask for more money.
Yeah. So first of all, nothing in life is guaranteed, right? And that's true in negotiations as well, right? So it's sort of the risk that you take in everything. So that's sort of the blanket statement right out the gate, right? But I feel like there's far bigger risk in never even approaching that conversation. And that risk is one of regret, of not having had that conversation to begin with, right? Lost opportunities, missed opportunities, right? So even when we look at sort of pay inequity and gender inequity, oftentimes it's associated with never asking in the first place and never knowing that there was an opportunity to negotiate. And that's sort of one of the big sort of gender differences, is that, you know, a lot of the studies show that men think everything is negotiable, whereas women oftentimes wait for that signal or the open opportunity to negotiate, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that that's why things like having data really helps, because yeah, I don't know about you, in life, I've rarely gotten what I thought I deserved, right? Like somehow, some way I had to just either work to convince people or sell my story. And really it's the same thing in negotiations. There's a quote that says in life, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And that's really the truth here. And so if you're negotiating for it, part of negotiations is really changing somebody's mind or opening their minds and hearts to what you're presenting, or convincing them that this is what they should do. And how do you do that? You don't do it subjectively. you give them data and information that is objective, and therefore they can actually understand it, right? Subjective information can be translated in a million different ways, right? People have different points of view. I hate to throw all these quotes at you. I'm a big quote person, but there's a Chinese proverb that says even a sheet of paper has two sides, right? So if you want them to see the side that you are presenting to them, then and make them sort of understand that to be the right thing to do, then speak the language that they know. Data is universal, right? Objective information is universal. And then it's not really about you. It's sort of the conversation that we had earlier, which was, I will be a much more engaged employee for the company, right? During COVID, people were laid off, or there was a lot of people who their time was cut, and all of a sudden they were furloughed, and other people had to take up their responsibilities. So a point of data could be, you furloughed all these other people. I'm doing the job of 2 or 3 people. These are the things that I've done. These are the initiatives that I've completed. These are the tasks that were not really part of my responsibility, but I did them. I was happy to do them. I've learned from them. I've grown from them. But I feel like I deserve to be paid, compensated for those things. And now what you've done is show them the information, show them the data, and tell them why you are sort of uniquely valuable, because in the time where they had nobody, you did for them. And these are the things that you did, right? So you're not coming to the table and saying, pay me more money because my name is Holly, or I deserve this, or I'm really the greatest things in sliced bread, right? You're saying, compensate me because I've done all these things, and I've done this for the company, and I will stay longer. I will feel appreciated. I will lean in harder, but this is the way to do that. So it really isn't the conversation of just me, I deserve. It's more about I did, and therefore this is sort of that next, sort of the next right thing to do, because it's sort of fulfilling your promise to me because I fulfilled mine to you. So I think it's generally that people don't bring in that level of information. They can't tell their story in that way. And the last thing I'll say to you is it's oftentimes not even what you're asking for, it's how you're asking, right? So, which is why I always say, see people, get rid of distractions, right? Have conversations that are connected, be kind, right? Kindness you never lose with kindness. I don't care what anybody says, right? If you lead with it, you lead with empathy, you think about this conversation from their perspective, because maybe it's not the right day to have this conversation with them, right? Maybe they're facing challenges. So if you're empathetic and you approach this from a perspective of what are your interests, what are my interests, how do we get to a solution together, then you're likely to get there. Because again, it's not a one-way type of a conversation. It's taking in and acknowledging both people's perspectives so you can get to a better outcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I wish it were just, I'm Holly. Give me what I want.
Yeah, if I walked through life and said, hi, I'm Mori and I deserve this, yeah, it would have been a whole lot easier.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think we have time for one more question.
Well, I actually, in regard to what Holly said, how do you, even when you're going into it, I think you're right, it's how it's presented. And it really almost, in my mind, it's coming at it with, this is sort of the win for everyone versus coming at it for fear that they're going to say no. But how are you shifting that? Because it really, that's the presentation. When I think about our employee who came to us, it was very clear. He was like, this is the win for me. This is the win for you. This is the win for the company. And I don't know that I would be able to necessarily come at it that way. Because I think like Holly, I'd be thinking, well, what if they say no? And it's almost like you can't have that in your head at all.
Right. No, you can, because but no can't be that scary, right? Like it's a 2-letter word that we give so much power to. And the reason why it's so scary for most people is because they feel like it's a hard stop. Like it's no, and that's it. If you present it in a way that the person feels like this is a yes, no kind of an ask, if they say no, it's 50-50, right? That's the best chance you have. that shouldn't be the end of it. So the presentation has to be done in a way that says, this is what I think, right? These are my needs. And if that doesn't work for them, then you have to have another option ready to go. So that if that doesn't work, you say, okay, I hear you, and find out why it doesn't work for them, by the way. If they say, we don't have the budget this year, then the next thing could be, okay, maybe what we could do is change my title. Like, that's not going to cost you anything, but when the next budget cycle, can we look at this again, right? And so now you're giving them another option because they said the budget doesn't work, right? And so if you have all those different positions, we call them in negotiations, to present to them, then it won't be no hard stop. It'll be no to this, but maybe yes to something else. And so present it the right way, which then inherently is a problem-solving conversation. Then I think, one, you're far less likely to hear a no, but two, no is no longer scary because that's not the end of the conversation. So sort of having other options that you could present to them is probably the best way to avoid that sort of no, and this is it. But you have to hear them. So when they say no, why are they saying no? Then maybe something else that worked would actually work for them as well.
Wow, thanks, Mori.
And we have
You're welcome.
one more question in the chat, and then we'll end today's program. But the question from Ralph: how does one find out more personal information about the people we are negotiating with if they are not on LinkedIn or Facebook?
Really interesting. First of all, these days I find like it's really hard not to be able to find information about people, right? Just Google your name. It's really quite scary, right? So there's a lot of information on people who are not even on social media sometimes. So you just have to spend that time kind of looking. So you may be able to find information about somebody reputationally. You might find somebody, look at where they're working at the very least, or any other sort of information that you may find about them that seems really sort of outside of that first or second degree of knowledge. But maybe somebody has gone to school with them, maybe somebody works with them, maybe there's a reputational piece out there. I find sometimes information on people through articles that they may have been sort of in college. And it's like they're 50 something, right? Like I'll go digging, I will find that, like I'm now part like investigator, right? So you will find information when there's a will, there's a way kind of thing. The internet has made it impossible to be able to find absolutely nothing about someone. So it takes longer. Now, let's just say they've been under a rock their entire life. They have zero information, right? You try all those ways of finding information. Now, what you have to be is inherently more curious, much more mindful when you meet them, much more present. And so when you're meeting them, even to have negotiations, the first part, there's sort of 4 stages to negotiations. The first part is sort of like the preparation phase, then what we call information exchange, which is the sort of getting to know you phase. And then it's the bargaining phase. Then I would say that getting to know you phase is the thing that is going to be really important, because you couldn't really find that much in your preparation. Information exchange will allow you to prepare on the spot, right? So you're not jumping into the transaction, you're leaning hard into getting to know them, right? So that's that sort of authentic small talk, the asking questions, the getting to know them, that becomes of importance. And maybe then the next time is when you're actually negotiating. This time is really just a getting to know you. Can I buy you a cup of coffee? Would love to talk to you a little bit more. And that then replaces what you couldn't get on the internet.
That's awesome advice, Mori. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you everyone for being here today, and a special thank you to Mori. This has been a really great and enlightening conversation for me, and I was a huge fan of your book, so just so grateful to be here. And I put my email in the chat. If anybody has any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to me. If you need to be connected to Mori, please feel free to reach out to me via my email address in the chat. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maury.
Thank you. Thanks for
you.
having me.
Great to see you again.